Hello? Hi, everybody. So, hello, everybody, and this is my third live stream for Whatifalthist. For those who are uninitiated, I'm doing this every 2 weeks during quarantine, and I just answer your questions about history, geopolitics, politics, philosophy, literature, lifestyle, basically anything you want to throw at me. Rules are pretty constant. Please don't spam. I have moderators who can get rid of you if you're misbehaving in the comments or swearing, that sort of thing. And as well as that, please don't overuse the what if scenario, because everyone here wants to have their own what if scenario made. And if we do it too much, it's going to start getting old and annoying. And so, with that out of the way, let's start with the questions my patrons gave me. They gave me lots of excellent questions, and so I have quite a bit. And so I'm going to split it up where the first half of my patrons' questions get answered at the beginning, and then 40 minutes along, I'm going to do the second half. But my moderator is currently sending me your best questions, so please don't spam because I'm receiving your best questions and I'll keep track of them. So thank you very much for watching, and let's get this started. So the first question is, how much influence did slavery in the New World have on the Industrial Revolution? I.e., would the Industrial Revolution have happened without slavery? And that is an interesting question because in our world, the Industrial Revolution and slavery were inextricably linked. The cotton fields of the American South needed the factories of the American North, Britain and France, etc., to produce their cotton, and so that never would have occurred without the Industrial Revolution. And but I don't think that inherently the two are inextricably linked, because as we could see, slavery started to die out as the Industrial Revolution continued, and by the end of the Industrial Revolution, nowhere in the Western world had slavery, and so and without slavery, not great labor conditions, but not slavery replaced them. So after the American Civil War, India and Egypt picked up most of the slack for slavery, for producing cotton that slavery couldn't. And a really interesting thing no one looks at is the necessity of producing stimulants for industrialization, in that people need to drink, for an industrial economy to work, people need coffee and sugar. And those really picked up a lot of the slack, tea as well, for to get people to work those long industrial hours. And at the beginning, those were produced by slaves, but towards the end of industrialization, that was produced by labor that wasn't treated great, but at least they weren't slavery. And so, okay, next question. Do you believe that humanity will ever unite? And I would say no, because the nature of human civilization is that people have inherently different self-interests. Each nation has its own self-interest. And these self-interests are just geometrically opposed in many situations. What's good for Russia is rarely good for Germany. What's good for China is rarely good for America. Oftentimes they intersect, but it's impossible, I believe, to make it something that's in everyone's self-interest. People will always try to use realpolitik to improve their condition. General predictions for the world in 2100. You're asking me to predict the better part of a century, so I think that's a difficult one. A lot of different things are going to happen. Geopolitically, I think we're going to move more towards a multipolar world in which you see all sorts of different powers playing off against each other, kind of like most of European history, in which you had like the French and the Germans and the Austrians and stuff all playing against each other. So I think you're going to have new powers like the Turks, maybe the Ethiopians, maybe some European power playing against the Indians, the Chinese, the Americans in a multipolar alliance network and in conflict. And I think that we're going to see the rise of all sorts of new religions and ideologies to deal with industrialization. And each different civilization is going to pick a different ideology, and that's how we're going to cope with the new technologies and stuff we have to deal with. So we need to figure out how to deal with mechanization, with biological engineering, and people are going to come up with all sorts of different solutions. So that could be horrifying and very interesting. And The final thing is, I think we're going to start expanding into space because it's just seems obvious to me. There's so much resources out there, and life on Earth is so puny that I think it would just make sense for us to expand into space. And I give my 2 cents, I personally think we're going to develop some technology that's going to be able to deal with global warming. Either put solar panels in space. I've heard lots of great things about thorium and the ability to make thorium plants. So I think we're going to be able to deal with with climate change in that way. Can you do a video on what if the French Revolution never happened? I'm normally breaking my rule for what if scenarios, but these are my patrons. So yes, I physically can do it. But the French Revolution is very complicated in that it spread democracy, but it inevitably lost. After 30 years, the whole everything was back to monarchical system. And so that meant that it's difficult to see how much the French Revolution affected the world. But at the same time, it set the seeds for the later rise of democracy and the later rise of populist politics, which became the dominant thing from the 19th century forward. And so that's interesting. What country do you think will end up worse after the pandemic? I would probably put India because India's got a huge population, but it's also not very wealthy, so it doesn't have the resources to deal with the pandemic well. And so I think India would be the one that would deal with the pandemic worst and see the most death. How likely is a dictatorship in America in the next 30 years? This is a very scary question. I think I'd put it about in 2/3 because the US has got all sorts of systemic issues that need solving if the nation's going to survive. And democratically elected leaders have not been able to deal with that. And so if we can't elect a leader that can reform the US and get rid of all the systemic issues, then I think we're very likely to have some sort of fascistic state or authoritarian state. Because these issues must be solved. And it's not going to be like a lot of liberals say Trump is going to make himself a dictator, or Republicans say the state's going to keep growing so big until it takes people's guns. I think the most likely option is the military would take over after civilian government would do something horribly dumb that would the military taking over would not be seen as bad because the military is respected in America. It's racially representative of the people. It's pretty efficient, and it's seen as an organization of honor. And so I think that if the military took power and was able to rule competently, similarly to the Roman Empire, I don't think many Americans would, if it made a state that didn't oppress American sense of dignity, then the military could run America. And I think that's very scary. And people say, like, if Trump were to seize power, nothing would happen. I think that if Trump or another elected leader would seize power, the military would kick him out. But I think the military itself could run America. And I wish that there was a way we could elect a leader and reform and maintain our freedom. And I think the other option is just very scary. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? So I'm currently in university and I'm studying history, but I don't want to go into academia. I have lots of relatives in academia and none of them like it. And I either want to become a writer or go into politics. And I want to go into politics because I really want to help the world and use my skills to improve the world. And for writing, I want to become a popular history writer. Because I think that if you go across history, popular history is consistently one of the most popular genres. But now, over the last 60 years, popular history really has not been a big seller. And so I think that someone could revitalize that. And the big issue with history writing now is that it's focused on tiny little things and pandering to different groups. And so I think that if you could write history books that would teach deeper truths and the meaning behind history, then I think you could be quite successful. Then, what if Antony had been made governor of Cisalpine Gaul? So for those of you who don't know, after Julius Caesar was killed, Mark Antony and Octavian, his nephew, Mark, sorry to saw a funny question. Mark Antony and his nephew were driving out the Republican forces out of Rome, and so there was a chance that Mark Antony could have been given north of Italy, which was a wealthy region, rather than Octavian or Emperor Augustus, who used north of Italy as his base to seize the empire, and that would have very bad effects because Octavian Augustus was the guy who fixed all the systemic flaws of the Republic and allowed the Pax Romana to exist for 200 years, which is one of the most stable, wealthy, and probably best parts of history to have lived in. Gibbon once said that the Pax Romana, the era of the Antonine monarchy, was the happiest time to be alive in history. And from the 18th century's perspective, that was true. And so a state in which Antony was a very military man, a very charismatic man, but he didn't have Augustus's systemic genius on how to be able to fix the Roman Empire. And so the empire would have just continued to be absolutely corrupt, and it probably would have been torn apart by some rival from the east, or Germanic barbarians, or slave revolts. Okay, so now we're done with my patrons' questions. So time to look at the questions that you've all been sending me. Okay. Do you have a degree in history, or are you currently working for a history degree? I already said this before, but I'm currently in university getting a history degree. I don't want to, I already said that, doesn't matter. I don't want to pursue becoming a history academic, though. And I try to study as many different fields as possible. I try to study anthropology, politics, as much science as I can, although I don't have any pretensions to know a lot about science. What is your stance on the Sea People and the Bronze Age collapse? It's a remarkably shocking analysis of how civilization can be weak, in that those Bronze Age civilizations had existed for thousands or hundreds of years, and people just took them for granted. But at the same time, they had created a society that had a lot of weaknesses, mostly the aristocracy's inability to deal with populism and relying on the strength of the chariot to maintain their states. And their inability to adapt meant that civilization was just wiped off the map. And I think that's a very sobering lesson about how, even in our time, that if a nuclear war were to break out between the great powers, we'd be pushed back 100 years technologically, and civilization would go into a dark age with the great powers and the great cities that we know of today just being gone. And Dan Carlin's got a very interesting book called The End Is Always Near, where he talks about the various apocalyptic phases of history and how each era of history has faced its own near apocalyptic moments, how Nineveh in 30 years went from being the biggest city on earth to being a pile of ashes, how the Black Death killed a third of Europeans, and imagine how traumatic that would be today. What would you do if you became Emperor of Earth? I would commit suicide. It's such a horrifyingly hard job dealing with the various self-interests of the earth, and I know that I would not be intelligent enough to do it. I would not have the skill, I would not have the genius that would be necessary, and I would know that it would be an unsustainable model that would inevitably lead to tyranny, because there's no way to make everyone happy, and so you just pick your ethnic group or nation and then lord over the rest, and you'd get rebellions. So I would probably destroy the world state and then commit suicide, and then hope to God I was remembered well for the rest of history. I mean, I guess I could set my family up with a lot of money too to keep them safe. So what legend or myth would you believe was real? Dragons. Dragons are fucking awesome. I cannot overstate that. I mean, and if dragons existed, we would have spent all of history pushing them out to the fringes, so I wouldn't have to worry about dragons eating my cats. And so I could visit them in the zoo. If I was super wealthy, I could probably do dragon hunting in Africa. And actually, when I was really small, I thought dragons did exist because I logically thought that if every culture in the world believed in dragons, that would mean there would have to be a common denominator by which dragons had to have existed to have inspired so many different cultures. And you see, I was a smart but weird kid as a child. Are you more of a fan of constitutional monarchy or a republic? I'm an American and a Canadian, so I would say that the two of them are reasonable systems. Republics are republics can work very well, but an issue that well, if we're being real, as of now, most constitutional republics and democracies function in very, very similar ways. In that, like the U.S. and Canada, Canada is in no way separated from America by having the Queen, because the Queen does nothing. But if we're looking at like 200 years ago with Britain versus America, then I would say I would prefer republics. The weaknesses that the two of them have, and the Greek philosophers knew this very well, and the American founding fathers also knew this, was that republics tend to look only at the short term because they're only care at getting elected for the next year, and so they can do stuff that that just doesn't make a lot of that doesn't work well in the long run. And constitutional monarchies, they have a tendency to be run by the aristocracies, and so that can result in complete oppression of the lower classes. And so I would say I prefer republics. Favorite dish to cook? Oh, that's really, really hard. I really like making duck and beef spice pie, which is a medieval dish. It's so much fun. It takes a couple hours to make. Oh, I like to make green tea smoked duck. So you marinate a duck in green tea for several hours, and then you cook it over a fire, and you rotisserie it, and it's just excellent. You get a nice olive oil rub to just max out the fats, put some rosemary and pepper on it. It's excellent. What happened to my Discord server? Wow, you're quite persistent since it's been almost a year since it's been down. It's a funny, long story. But so I made the Discord server to go on the Appalachian Trail because I knew I wouldn't be able to make videos, and I wanted to stay in touch with my fans. And so after that, I set up the server. I had no experience with Discord before. I must be frank with you all. And so I didn't make the moderators. I didn't do anything. I thought it would have natural systems in there. I was quite ignorant, and I probably should have done more research. And then people started posting porn, all sorts of degenerate content. And so I started getting moderators. But the main moderator that I chose, I didn't know this at the time. He turned out to be a neo-Nazi. And he started kicking out my other moderators and started putting neo-Nazi propaganda. And so I tried to remove him from power, but I left an obscure back channel that I didn't fully understand that let him destroy the whole server. But during my time at Discord, I sort of realized I didn't like Discord that much because I need to be very thorough, and I need a lot of time to sit back and relax and before I answer a question. This is why I don't do Reddit. And so I didn't like the constant battering at me that came with Discord. And so I never made a new Discord channel. If you could bring back any empire or country from the past, would you? And if you could, which one would it be? Turkish nationalists are going to love this. I would bring back the Ottoman Empire. Because if the Ottomans could rule much of the Middle East and create a state that respected the rights of the local peoples and brought peace, then I would think that then I would bring back the Ottomans and have them rule the Middle East. I mean, it would be better than the current brutal thugs that run places like Syria and Saudi Arabia. And yeah. Do you think the US will no longer be #1 in the next 10 years? I don't think so. So the only real competitor to put the US out of power in the next 10 years would be China. And China is so destabilizing to the balance of power that everyone around China will, at one point or another, ally against it. India, Vietnam, Japan, Korea, they're all allied against China. And Russia's the big exception. But if China gets too big, then Russia is going to change to ally with America or some other power to keep China from taking over the Russian Far East. Have you ever read the book The Decline of the West? If so, what do you think of the pessimistic view of Oswald Spengler had? And do you think he was correct? I've never read Decline of the West. I do know what it talks about, though, and what its main points are. So for those of you who don't know, Spengler was a German writer of the 30s, and he basically believed that the Western civilization had been in decline and would continue to do so. And I've never read the book, so I can't vouch for being entirely understanding his career to his career and what he meant. But in general, I would say I agree. In a lot of ways, um, in a lot of ways, he in a lot of ways, Western civilization has been in decline versus after World War One. And I'm going to sound like a reactionary old grandpa for saying this, but I mean, art has been terrible since the Second World War. I mean, if you go through a museum and you look at the art from 17th through 19th centuries, it's absolutely gorgeous. And the stuff we put out now is shit. I mean, what the fuck? Why do I like these rectangular squares? They're garbage. And I mean, film's been getting worse since the 70s. Like, The Godfather, the movies from the 30s are masterpieces. We're putting fucking Transformers out now. All the movies we put, Marvel movies are smart in their own way, but they're not art. They're like the little theater plays that people put on in the Middle Ages. I'm sorry, there are probably lots of Marvel fans here. I don't want to hate on you for liking Marvel. Marvel is they do their game really well. I just don't think it's art. And so, Europe used to be the greatest power in the world, and they just completely gave it up. And Europe is now unwilling to put its values out into the world. So, Europe is unwilling to, when Yugoslavia happened, the European nations didn't do anything to stop it. And so I think in a lot of ways, the West has been in decline since World War One. How far could Russia push into Europe if they invaded this year? That's a very interesting question. So the main thing the American allies like Poland, the Baltics, Romania, etc., they could stop. Well, they'd have to hold off Russia for about a month, and then the Americans could show up. And so I'm not buddies with Putin. Putin is not telling me everything there is to know. The State Department does not tell me everything they know. But I think Russia's mobilization abilities are less than what they were during the Soviet Union. But I know they've been getting dramatically better. So my general idea is that they could probably push to Warsaw, and then the Americans could hold them off after that, and working with the Poles. And the big thing would be, would the Western Europeans be able to mobilize and defend Eastern Europe? And one of my worries is that if the Russians took over Eastern Europe, that Western Europe would just cut a deal with them, or France and Germany would cut a deal with them, where they would get cheap Eastern European labor and subsidize Russian goods in exchange for leaving the American alliance. And I'm not sure if that would happen. Could Austria unify Germany if France won the Franco-Prussian War? So I think industrialization would mean that ethnic groups and nations that have been divided before be more likely to unite due to rising nationalism, due to people seeing people who weren't their ethnic group and travel. But it would be some really weird, really loose confederacy that probably be brutally inefficient and would probably barely work. Can Scandinavia unite? Those countries have been there for more than 1,000 years, and the Norwegians have never stopped being Norwegians. Swedes have never stopped being Norwegian. Swedes, Danes have never stopped being Danes. So I see no reason why Scandinavia would unite. Do you think China will ever collapse and become a democracy? It depends on what direction the Chinese Communist Party goes into. So, I've heard a lot of mixed things about China. There are lots of very patriotic Chinese people I know, and then people who are anti-communist and dislike what the Chinese government's doing. And so if the Chinese government takes China down a path where China has to go through a lot of suffering, the Chinese people are going to rebel. And I'm not sure if it'll become a democracy. It might become a nationalist state, but hopefully it'll become a democracy. But if China continues to become a greater and greater power, and the Chinese government is able to completely solidify control with various Orwellian tactics, then the Communist Party could stay in power. Because the big thing that's kept the Communist Party in power is its ability to make China wealthier. And if that stops, then we would see the Communist Party fall into various jeopardy. American Civil War in 2020. No, I don't think we'd ever have I don't think we'd have a civil war for two different reasons. First is the Republicans would win that civil war in about a month, and the Democrats know that too. And so the Democrats know that if started a war with the Republicans, they would lose. And also, the U.S. has so many external opponents that I think that Americans are going to come together and are going to be able to unite against external opponents rather than turning in themselves. And yeah. Um, hmm. A curious question. If someone gave you $500 in your Patreon per month and asked you for a 30-minute alt history video as a request, would you do it? Yeah, $500 is a lot of money. I like making these videos. Hit me up. Views on automation. So, I'm of two opinions on this. However, one opinion is stronger than the other. My weaker opinion is that nations that don't deal with the advancement of technology get crushed, and that's been true throughout all of history. And so if you can't keep up with technological progress, you're going to lose. And also, lots of people have worried at progress, and it turned out to not be a big deal. Like, you hear those crazy stories, like people being worried that going on a train for 20 miles an hour would do bad stuff to your immune system. Or, I mean, there's lots of people in the modern world who worry about 5G Wi-Fi, or I don't know. It's there's lots of different things. Like, people worry that there's a natural fear of technology inside all of us, and oftentimes that's just completely unfounded. It's a fear of the new. But at the same time, automation is hurting the average worker a lot, and the purpose of technology and the purpose of progress is to improve individual human dignity, to make human life better. But if automation makes it so that there's a tiny class that controls everything in the society, and the average person is just a completely useless, then that's not good. That takes pride away from humanity. And so I think that if automation goes against human interest and hurts our societies and hurts our happiness, I think we should try to stop it. But those are my 2 cents. Hmm. Wow, a lot of questions. Would you remake your World War I alternate history video? Yeah, I'm about to do that. I'll do that over the next few months. If you could change your nationality to a country which no longer exists, what country would you change it to? I always loved the Vikings. I just love the Viking spirit. I love their style. I'd probably be like 10th century Norway. Yeah. Oh, medieval Iceland. I love the medieval Icelandic system, which, for those of you who don't know, there actually isn't a government. All the individual farmers meet once a year at the Althing and listen to the law speaker, who is this guy who's memorized every single law in the book. And so I would love to be part of medieval Iceland. And they deal with things by fighting. And so, like, if a man's besmirched your honor, then you challenge him to a duel. And but there's no government, no army. I mean, it sounds like a great state. Why is your voice really nice to listen to? Thank you very much. Are you hitting on me? Could the Eastern Roman Empire and the Holy Roman Empire or Charlemagne's empire have ever united in any sort of union? I'm making that video 2 videos from now. So that's going to come out in the next month. So check out for that. Worst European colonizers. So it's sort of become a meme how much I hate the Spanish, but I'd have to give it to the Belgians, which is kind of funny because Belgium, you don't think of it as a violent nation because it's known for chocolate and beer and fries and all sorts of tasty foods that'll raise your cholesterol. But the Belgians in the Congo, what they did was just absolutely horrifying. It was terrible. And so I'd have to go with Belgium. Although after Leopold, the Congo they treated the native population much better. And the Congo was actually the second wealthiest nation in Africa but in the 1960s. And then the native Congolese leadership drove it downhill, so the DRC is one of the poorest nations on the earth now. Do you have plans to make more videos? I have no idea what that means. If you became a politician, do you think you could bring back the good old days to America? So personally, I don't believe in the idea of the good old days. Things get better or worse, but to say one era is amazing is it's kind of foolish. People say the 1950s was a simpler time, but I mean that wasn't true if you were black, or I don't know if women thought they were oppressed. Um, but and they were just terrified of nuclear war. It was a horrifying time, a scary time to live in. But and I have no pretensions of being a great figure or that sort of thing. But I mean, I would try my best. I would try to use my geopolitics and my knowledge of history and people, try to improve the nation, and hopefully it would work out. Although no singular figure in history has ever saved no singular figure in history has ever made the world perfect. So I try my best. Any plans on more Indian subcontinent related content, especially ancient Indian scenarios? I would love to. However, I don't know enough about Indian history. So if you want to give me book recommendations, email me at haroldsigurdson@gmail.com. And but India is difficult for me to understand because there are so many different intersecting levels. You've got caste, you've got ethnicity, you've got nation, you've got language, and so I have no pretensions to understanding India in its fullest. What do you work as? I'm a student. This is the job that keeps me from working at Dunkin' Donuts. This pays for my my rich partying lifestyle. What do you think is the best economic system right now? If capitalism, what kind of capitalism? Same with socialism. So you can have two views of the world. I assume one is better than the other, but live your life. So you can either view the world as stagnant and you try to equalize things, or you can view the world as a growing pie. And so if you want to maintain equality and stability, then the European system of democratic socialism is the best. Countries like Sweden and Northern European countries, Norway, Denmark, those are probably the best countries to live in the world, and highest indexes of happiness, highest in every metric. So you'd have to say that the Northern European style of social capitalism is a very good system. But at the same time, Europe, since it developed that system, has declined from 38% of the world's economy to like 23. Well, the United States, with its system its capitalist system, has been able to maintain an economic level around 26% over the last 60 years. And the US is the biggest technological innovator in the world. It's been able to maintain world dominance. It's grown a huge amount. And so if you want to grow, then the American system of capitalism is the best. But if you want stability, the European system of social democracy is the best. And so I would say you should meet somewhere in the middle, where you should develop a system that encourages growth, but at the same time allows economic stability. So my personal solution would be low taxes except inheritance taxes, so that people can make as much money as they want, but at the same time you don't develop a hereditary aristocracy. Do the 8 values quiz. It's like the political compass. I took that quiz. I was middle of a lot of different things. I don't think that's accurate. I was in the center of most of the categories, but I don't think that's true. Wow, you got a lot of different questions. At what point do you think the US would decline? I mean, compared to our high in the 1990s, where we were the only superpower, we already have started to. However, I mean, the US is probably going to be a great power for the next 1,000+ years, sliding in and out of dark ages and golden ages, as every great power does. I mean, nothing can really unseat, like France, UK, Turkey, China, they've all existed for at least 1,000 years. And so it's hard to get rid of countries. And I would say, I think parts of the US are probably going to split off. I can't see California remaining part of the US for longer than 200 years from now. Possibly the Mormons, maybe New England might split off, maybe the American South, although I think that's less likely. But I mean, even a part of America is really powerful. Like the American South, if it was a country today, would be the third biggest economy and the third biggest military on Earth. Hmm. What if the Germanic tribes conquered and assimilated the areas they entered after the fall of Rome? So, we saw with England. England is the most evident example of this. Same with the Rhineland areas, like the north of Belgium, the border entity in France and Germany. But in a lot of places, there just weren't enough Germanic barbarians. Like I've heard, like the Vandals and Goths were like 100,000 to 300,000 people, and the Roman Empire had a population of like 60 million at that point. And so it would have been very hard in the heavily populated Mediterranean heartlands of the empire to assimilate areas like Italy and southern France and those places. Um, um, hmm. Do you think Ireland could have become a colonial empire if it united earlier? I mean, yeah. So I did a video on this, and Ireland could have been a great power because of their geographic position in the Atlantic, and if they wanted to maintain independence from England, the best route to do so would have been to build a kick-ass navy, and they could have used that navy to project power. And just look at the Irish diaspora. So in 1650, there were about 800,000 Irish, but today there are 40 million people of Irish descent. And so that's meant that the Irish were willing to leave Ireland, and if they had a colonial empire, they could have had a huge diaspora as well. Will you do a video about what if the Ottoman Empire industrialized? I will, but I want to read Lord Kinross's The Ottoman Years first, so I can get a firm grasp on the Ottoman Empire first. What if Jerry Seinfeld was president? I'm too young to fully know his work, but I'm assuming it would be better considering our last few presidents. Do you think Turkey will become a great power? I say this in every video, but I think Turkey is likely to become one of the greatest powers of our time. Watch my other videos to see why. What do you think of country balls, Poland ball? So I'm not really into memes. I have lots of friends who are, but the only reason I know anything about any memes is because my friends show them to me. But I don't like meme Reddit boards. I don't like Instagram. I don't, because like on Instagram, I'll follow these like meme or Poland ball boards, and then I'll just get on their ass for minor inaccuracies, and then all their fans will protect them with loyal devotion. And I'm like, what do I get out of this? So Catholic Piccolo, you keep on saying, what are your thoughts on economic system of distribution? I have no idea what you mean. Can you please speak more to that? Why is anti-Semitism so prevalent throughout history? So the Jews so for most of history in agrarian systems, the peasantry don't understand the greater market forces. They just work in the fields and they don't understand anything more. And so the Jews who were living in the cities and were doing advanced jobs like smithing, like finance work, they got very rich, and they completely eluded the peasantry who didn't understand how they were getting rich. And so the peasantry assumed they had to be stealing it. And the urban elites, or the nobility and the elites, propagated this so that it would take the onus off them and to create an external opponent. And so that's why anti-Semitism has existed for so long. Is history cyclical? In a couple ways, yeah. I mean, I don't think it's cyclical to be sure, but there's definitely cause and effect. So, like, you see similar effects. Similar sorts of regimes can end in certain ways. Similar geographical areas can develop similar cultures. And so it's like a code where in coding, if you have like a series of if statements. If blank condition is met, blank result is met. And so it's like a highly complex code with a series of different results for different conditions. And so you see the same patterns repeat again and again and again and again, but it's not cyclical. I think it's just you have similar results in similar situations throughout history. Um, what is your testosterone level? I don't know how to answer that. I hike the Appalachian Trail. I collect swords. Probably pretty high. Do you code often? I code a little bit of Python. I took a course in it. I've made a video game where I was king of 17th century Poland, Lithuania, and I had to fight off invaders from Sweden and Russia and Tartary, and that was fun. It was a text game like the one you would get in the 80s, but I only took a single course in it, so I have no pretensions to being a good coder. I also made a game where I was a cowboy wandering through a dungeon slaying monsters from Irish mythology. Okay, guys, we're on to the 40-minute mark. So let's move through more of these. My moderator here is writing down your really great questions, so don't worry about that. What video games model history the best? So I play a lot of strategy games, and so someone asked me which video game is able to best understand history. And in general, I would say Civilization. Civilization is a very good model of progress and is able to understand history to a certain degree. But Civilization also doesn't understand the inherent chaos. Or Sid Meier's Civilization. For those of you who don't know video games, I'm sorry. Space out for like 5 minutes. So Civilization is very good for progress in the good side of history in which things get better, but it doesn't understand that history just inherently chaotic barbarian, just beating stuff down and diseases and bad leadership. And so that's that. This is going to be a very, very... by the way, Paradox, I haven't played a lot of Paradox games. I've played tiny amounts of Hearts of Iron, Crusader Kings, and I never got into Paradox. I was too lazy to fully learn the games, and I'm more of an action-based guy. And so I love the RTSs like Company of Heroes, like StarCraft, all that stuff. And so the best model, and this is going to be a really, really weird answer, is Warhammer Total War, actually. Warhammer Total War is how history actually works. So I love the Warhammer universe because the Warhammer universe is how people in the Middle Ages and in the pre-modern era viewed the world, in that you've got these random forces of chaos. They're just OP, smashing down civilization with impunity. Like, I was playing the Empire against the fucking armies of chaos, and the armies of chaos, I had 3 times their men, and they brought out these fire chariots and demons and dragons, and they just started ripping apart my troops. And I was like, this must be what fighting the Mongols feels like. And when you go to different continents, you see these monsters, you see these people who are entirely different from you. And this is how the conquistadors must have felt when they were discovering these new continents. And so I like the Warhammer worlds because it's emotionally what history would have felt like for the people who were living it. In history, people actually believed in witches. People believed in dragons. And so it's how they would have experienced history. And also, Warhammer Worlds marks chaos very well, in that most early modern medieval states barely had money to do anything, and they were constantly being attacked on all sides. And that's what I love about to the Total Wars in general. The Total Wars are great for the chaos and confusion of actual history. If you were stuck in an island with one book, what book would it be? So my favorite book of all time is The Spiritual Teachings of Marcus Aurelius. It's a book of Stoic philosophy that tells you how to live your life. It tells you how to deal with anger and fear and horror. Like, Marcus Aurelius, reading his book just changed my life. And whenever I have to do something tough, I just flip through some pages of Marcus Aurelius. When I need inspiration, life is difficult. And so if I could bring Marcus Aurelius, then that would help me the most, I would think. He was for those of you who don't know, he was a Roman philosopher / emperor around the 200 AD. And he before he would go to bed, he would write down his various thoughts and philosophies in this notebook, and then that notebook became the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. Itamar Klartag, you know it's really not cool to spam, but I'm still going to answer your question. What is your opinion on history lessons in the American education system? I've talked about this before. I think it's really bad in that so the left and the right can't agree on how history should be taught so it doesn't get taught. And so we have social studies, which just does this vague ass shit, like what the flag symbolizes. And I don't like that. Do you think China will cut off trade with the US to weaken the American economy, or would they do better to economically dominate the US's trade? So China is rising in power as of now, and the US is not stagnant, but it's not rising as fast as China. And so it's in China's self-interest to grow quietly and gain more and more power until they're able to be so powerful that America can't threaten them. And America's self-interest is to keep China weak and keep China from surpassing America. And so the US is currently realizing that. So that's part of Trump's retaliatory actions against China. And so if the US ignores China, China will just want to continue to grow and gain more influence inside the American economy. And what the U.S. is currently doing is it's not allowing that. It's trying to hurt the Chinese economy and split it up and weaken China as a great power. You've said before that you don't like correlating empire/colonialism with wealth. That there is an ongoing debate/narrative in the West became wealthy because it exploited the rest of the world, as opposed to its own methods. Could you delve deeper into this idea and give your debate/narrative for why it's so popular today? Okay, so there's a lot of different stuff to unpack there. So most empires, the actual empire does not raise the level of the wealth. The big thing is you need to have mercantile influences be strong enough inside the economy, because most states in history are run by priests or by the warrior class, and neither of them puts the methods gained from the empire and the wealth gained from the empire to productive use. They normally use it for luxuries. So when the Roman Empire was getting all the wealth from their various provinces, they weren't using it to expand the economy. They were putting it towards eating ostriches and wearing silk for all their clothing. But and that's the way most empires are. So if you look at history, around 1600, the biggest empires, Russia, the Ottomans, the Manchus, the Mughals, all of them economically fell behind the smaller, better organized states like England, France, Scandinavia, etc. The Spaniards, too, big empire that didn't manage their empire well. But if you have a mercantile class that's able to reinvest the wealth of the empire into various stuff that'll give you returns back, then empires can be quite effective for expanding wealth. But in general, I would say that the West has risen due to its own strengths rather than empires, because before the Industrial Revolution, the Western nations had smaller populations than the great, huge empires like the Ottomans and the Chinese. But they were better able to organize their populations. And I made a chart of this before in my Atlantic slave trade video. The countries that did the most with the Atlantic slave trade, like Portugal and Spain, were the poorer ones, while countries that did nothing with it, like Germany and Denmark, or close to nothing, were quite wealthy. And so it's more about how you organize your society than it actually is about the amount of resources you have. Like, there's this idea that if you have natural resources, you're more likely to be successful. But if you look at Japan and like, let's say the Netherlands, neither has anything valuable, but they organize their societies efficiently. Well, Nigeria and Brazil have so many resources, but they're both poor because the resources get frittered away by the elite for luxuries rather than reinvesting into the economy. And This idea is popular. The idea that the West got all its wealth from exploiting other peoples is popular because a lot of it's after World War One, the World Wars. The West lost a sense of its own purpose because the Holocaust, the trenches were so horrifying that the West lost in the ability of their own civilization to be good and to improve the world. And so the West feels immense guilt for all its wealth because they have no purpose to justify why they should have that wealth. And so they like to, and there's a certain arrogance that comes from pissing on your ancestors. And I think a lot of white guilt actually comes out of, like, the last few generations of the West have not accomplished a lot compared to their ancestors. And so if we can say our ancestors are bad, then it allows us to look better. So, I mean, as an American, I mean, my grandparents won the world wars. I mean, the people before them, the people before them for won World War One. People before that settled the West. People before that made the democracy. And my parents' generation and my generation, we haven't done nothing compared to that. So it's easy to hate in our ancestors to win those points. If you could prevent any event in history, what would it be? In general, I would say the Islam's movement towards becoming a less rational religion with Al-Ghazali. I've said this before, but if Islam could remain a scientifically based ideology and could remain rationality and believe more in studying the world and studying the Quran and the shift that took place in the Middle Ages, Islam would be a great world power and technologically advanced and have a huge standard of living. And that would help hundreds of millions or a billion people. And it would have improved technology quite a bit. So if I could change anything, I would have killed Al-Ghazali and made the rational school inside Islam take over. If you could have championed a major religion when it was becoming popular, which would you have picked? So I know it's sort of a meme on this channel how much I talk about Mithraism, but I actually don't. I'm not a Mithraist. I don't like how Mithraism treats women. And so, I mean, Stoicism is a huge part of what I believe, but just knowing people and hanging out with my friends and dealing with society, I know most people just don't have it inside them to become Stoics. I liked the original Islam quite a bit. I like a lot of Islam's basic tenets, like belief that no intermediaries between you and God. Like I feel like Islam at its core is a profoundly honest religion, and I guess that at the start of it, I probably would have tried to propagate Islam, and like if I was in the 7th or 8th century Middle East. Okay, so that's it. What if America had the same population as China? It would be Soylent Green. For those of you who haven't seen it, Soylent Green is a 70s movie where the U.S. is the funny thing is, in Soylent Green, it was made in 1971. The U.S. has the same population as it does today, but they didn't know it. The Green Revolution hadn't happened, and so they thought that with 300 million people, America would be starving. But our agricultural intake just shot up, and but I mean, if America had China's population just breeding over the last 250 years of American history, it would be Soylent Green. We couldn't keep up. And I'm not going to spoil the ending of the movie, but oh, come on, God. Soylent Green is people! Sorry, I had to do that. More questions. I just want to say you're a phenomenal YouTuber. Thank you very much. I do try my best. So, how do I restore the caliphate? I think that's a you problem, not a me problem. I would say you'd have to become remarkably charismatic. You would have to study politics and statecraft and Islamic theology, and then be very lucky. I mean, power to you. Can you think of an alternate history that would affect you or your ancestors directly? The big one would probably be, what if America won the South in the Civil War? Because I have ancestors from both the South and the North who fought on both sides. And so I would have ancestors who would be part of the Confederacy and the Union. And if they had to fight each other, that would be the Confederacy and the Union had to fight each other and become different countries. I think that would have changed my ancestral line quite a bit. And I mean, I can't think of any huge political events that my family's been directly part of recently. Um, um, which domesticated animal do you think has been most important for the development of civilization? I answered this last time, but I went with the horse and the sheep, since the horse has been so important and seminal for warfare, and the sheep is the earliest domesticated animal. Um, Thoughts on genetic engineering and the possible speculation of humanity. So, I actually think genetic engineering can be a good idea if it's done properly. I think that it can improve a lot of characteristics about ourselves. And what we're currently doing is that we're doing it irrationally without a great philosophy to support us. And so I think we should develop a more advanced philosophy and morality to deal with genetic engineering, to figure out what is and isn't right and okay. And then we can use it to fully unlock our potential. Like if we colonize other planets with different gravities or oxygen levels, we could genetically engineer ourselves to be better or designed for said planets. Um, Any thoughts on the French Empire and how it operated at the same time compared to other European monarchies? So I'm of British descent. I'm a Canadian. I'm always going to back the British Empire. And so I think the British Empire was it was very good for white settler societies, but at the same time, it was just moderate for colonies of color, if that's the term. Well, the French Empire, it was the same for colonies of color, and they were more about racial equality and more about if you were an Arab but studied French culture and knew how to behave in a French manner, you could be French, although that was less real than their propaganda said it was. And but I mean, for white settler societies like Quebec, I mean, the French government mismanaged Quebec poorly, and they didn't let dissenters move there. They made it illegal for the coureurs de bois, the French fur trappers, to operate, and so the coureurs de bois just sided it with the English, and yeah. Have you ever considered making a video on alternate history scenarios that wouldn't have significantly changed history? I feel like I have made some videos that are just like nothing changes. And I don't remember exactly which ones, but I don't like making those videos because it just feels like I'm wasting your time. I'm just giving some long-winded answer for something that really doesn't matter. If you go into politics, would it be in the US or Canada? USA. I grew up in the US. I understand the system better. And I mean, if you're a prime minister of Canada, you're still, for all intents and purposes, subservient to the Americans. If Washington tells you to do something, you have to do it, basically. And if it's something really important. But if you're the American president or a big leader in America, you're at the center of power. What flag do you like most? I like the Sri Lankan flag best. It has like a lion dragon on it, and then that's just really awesome. I wish more countries had medieval style flags where you have a big animal. Like it would be awesome if America's flag was the eagle with the arrows and the laurel leaf. It would be awesome if the English flag was the Angevin lion or the Wessex dragon, but we don't live in that world. What do you think of Herodotus? Herodotus was, he was, I don't think he's a historian in the modern sense. He's more of a travel writer who told stories about the whole world, and he wasn't from a society that really valued historical accuracy. And that's the big thing we fault him for, that his stuff isn't that accurate. But you have to remember he was making history, and we're holding up to him up to the standards that barely existed at the time. But I mean, his writing is really interesting. It talks about all sorts of places that we would know nothing about. We would know nothing of the Masagatai of Central Asia or what they thought about India. So another question. Oh, I forgot what that one said. Sorry, guys. Oh, yeah. What are your thoughts on Yuval Noah Harari with Sapiens and 21 Rules for the 21st Century? So Sapiens is an excellent book. It's number 6 in my video on my 11 favorite history books because it's it understands human nature and humanity on such a basic level, and it does a great job of that. Well, 21 Laws for the 21st Century, it just felt like a lazy rehash of Homo Deus. And I feel like Yuval was not very good at applying his principles to the future. And he does what a lot of people do when they predict the future, is that they project whatever trend's been going on for the last 20 years into the future indefinitely. So like George Orwell was like, communism's done well over the last 20 years. Let me project it doing well for another 40 years. Or people were like in the 70s, population's grown quite a bit. And over the last few decades, it's going to continually and indefinitely get bigger. And that rarely happens, which is why when I try to predict the future, I try to look at the grand scheme of history. So I don't get stuck up in the last few decades, and I can see the grand patterns that take place. What if Karl Marx didn't exist? That video is coming out in July. Wait for it. Do you think the Arabs will branch out into new cultures and languages? I mean, they already have to a certain extent. Like I know Maghrebi Arabic is mutually unintelligible from Pakistani Arabic. So, like I've heard in the West, we mostly learn Pakistani Arabic, and so if you go to Tunisia or Algeria, they'll have no idea what you're saying. What fictional character would be the best leader? So this is kind of obscure. I don't know how many of you have read, God, what's his name? Steve Erickson. In the second book of the Malazan series, he's got this badass genius leader called Coltane. And Coltane, so the Malazan, it's a fantasy novel. The Malazan Empire is being attacked due to a rebellion. And so Coltane is able to lead an army of 10,000 refugees, like 500 miles through the desert, while being constantly attacked by forces many times his size. And he's able to do it because he's like the Hannibal of this world. And but the really sad ending, this is why I stopped reading the Malazan series, was that he dies and he's killed for completely dumb reasons because the local potentate doesn't like him and think he's getting too powerful. And I'm like, if you're fucking Colton, you can kill the local potentate. But I mean, I don't like a lot of really dark fantasy where the whole purpose is to make you sad and kill off characters and to be edgy. And so that's why I never got into Game of Thrones. You got the impression that I got to season 5 of the TV show. I got the impression George R. R. Martin was just killing off characters for the sake of it rather than for the plot. And I mean, after that, the TV show just seems the characters started to act dumb and stopped acting like they're real characters. I don't know why everyone keeps on asking me for what if the Byzantium won Manzikert, because I've made that video. It's one of my most popular. Wow, I cannot keep up with this. What is the likelihood for human civilization by 2100? Likelihood for human extinction by 2100? Wow, so I would say remarkably low. Even if we humans are a really, really hardy species, and that's something that's just completely self-evident from everything we've suffered through, between the Mount Toba eruption that killed almost most of the human race outside Africa, to the ice ages, to the Black Death. We humans are really tough, and if we face something really difficult, we can invent our way out of it. So what are the existential threats that kill us by 2100? Nuclear war. Nukes are becoming less and less important. So in 1980, a nuclear war would probably kill 1 or 2 billion people. Now, due to THAAD and other missile defense systems and the lessening of nuclear weapons, nuclear war would kill about 300 million, which is scary, because between a war between the great powers, it would, I mean, the countries could still fight each other. China, Russia, all those powers would still be capable of waging war after a nuclear war. And in climate change, if we were getting to a state where climate change was going to drive us extinct, we would completely revolutionize our system so that wouldn't happen. Favorite fictional map? I'll come back to you. I do a lot of fantasy stuff, so I would need to think of a fantasy universe that had a very good map system. Do Do you think an extreme veganism and environmentalism could lead to a modern form of animism in the next 100 years? I think it already is. I mean, environmentalism is in many ways becoming a religion more than a lot of things. Like a lot of environmentalists, in my opinion, it's not actually about helping people. It's a chest beating to demonstrate that they are morally superior. And like, like a lot of it, I mean, the best way to stop climate change would be creating incentives inside the capitalist system so that it would monetarily make more sense to for the capitalist system to move on to green energy. But like, they'll just want to seem to destroy the capitalist system and completely remake our society. And there's the Gaia theory, which is basically that the Earth is a single organism, and I think that has some validity. And it would make sense if you make a religion based off the idea that the Earth is inherently an organism. And I mean, that sounds pretty cool. Do I like Tolkien? Yeah, I love Tolkien. He was the only thing I paid attention to from ages 10 to 13. I could recount the Lord of the Rings movies almost from memory. I mean, I played Battle for Middle-earth. I would play that after school for like an hour every day for like 2 years. I love Tolkien. I kind of my Tolkien love kind of declined though after middle school because I realized actual history was more real. And if the British kept 13th century cuisine, how would it be like today? Finally, someone knows British cuisine used to be good. If you go through old recipe books, like the fucking nerd I am, British cuisine was amazing. Like the stuff they were eating in Jane Austen's era was just beautiful. And then the Industrial Revolution and food rationing and all that stuff, it really hurt the quality of their cuisine. And so if Britain had kept its cuisine from before the Industrial Revolution, they'd have a cuisine similar to Germany's. It would be great food. I mean, also, American food is very good for the Industrial Revolution. If you go through 18th and 19th century cookbooks, it's all really good stuff. Like the Pennsylvania specialty was turtle soup, or like lots of nice venison, lots of like capons and birds you can't find today. I mean, I would give anything to eat a passenger pigeon, to be honest. What is the likeliness of a nation turning into an anarchist state in the modern day? I would say, sorry, I need to always fix the lighting here because the clouds keep on changing out there. Lighting in my house is terrible. So anarchism doesn't deal with the profound truth of the world in that the state is necessary the state must wage war to survive. And the primary purpose of the state is to wage war and protect its citizens. If a state cannot protect its citizens, then it'll collapse and be conquered. And so an anarchist state lacks the centralized organization to wage war and to protect its citizens. And although I love medieval Iceland as an anarchist state, then I mean, in the real world, Iceland had no attackers. So I see, and society needs order and power to function. What if the Hussite rebellion succeeded? It did. I mean, the Hussites were given religious tolerance. That sounds like they won. What do you think? For anarchist states, Somalia is doing pretty well. I guess if you're a bloodthirsty warlord, Somalia is the place to be. But I mean, Matthew White in his atrocity books did an analysis. Any authority, no matter how bloody, Mao, Stalin, Hitler, they all killed less people in the natural state of chaos because our modern society is so complex, especially cities. When you develop cities, you need to feed a lot of people. And so like for New York City, London, Paris, they all take food from hundreds or thousands of miles away. So once you develop the system of coercion and cooperation, people start to starve. So that's why order is always superior to chaos when it comes to politics. And I mean, it's better to have a balance where people can maintain their freedoms, but freedom has no meaning without order because you need to have centralized authority that can protect people's freedoms. What do you think about Africa? Would you like to be more specific about a continent that has 1 billion people and is 3 times the size of the United States? If contraceptives were invented in the 15th century, would women's rights come earlier? I would say no. Contraceptive is one thing, and that allowed women's rights. Another was the washing machine, and the washing machine, because before that, it took about 11 hours a week to wash clothing, and so it was very women had. I don't want to say women had to do that job, but they're societally forced to. Someone had to do that job, and at the same time, another big thing was easy meals and the ability to like eat out and all that stuff that allowed women's rights. And men had enormous advantages over women with their upper body strength before the Industrial Revolution, because women can or had great difficulty pushing a plow, which was the basis of agriculture. And so once you have mechanization, which could take away a lot of men's advantages in strength, that allowed women's liberation. What is your favorite and least favorite country? My favorite country of all time is New Zealand. People are so friendly. It's a beautiful country. New Zealand is the way the world should be, in my opinion. And my least favorite country, I haven't been to every country on earth by all means. I'm trying to think of the countries that people have told me the worst about. I've heard Romania is not a pleasant country to be in. I read travel blogs for my free time. I read people who go to obscure countries, and my uncle used to have a job where he would travel to different countries to see their different expenses. And he said the worst country was New Guinea. And I was reading a travel guide for New Guinea. It said, don't bring a camera, your phone, or jewelry out to the street, or you're going to be robbed and killed. Or I can't say that on TV. Sorry. Next question. What if Russia converted to Islam? I don't think it would have. Almost all of Russia's trade in the 10th century was with the not almost all, but a large part was with the Byzantine Empire. And so a large reason Russia converted to Orthodox was to get better trade deals on with the Byzantine Empire. And at the same time, Islam does very badly in forest societies. And you have to remember the two things that Islam had great trouble with was that in 10th and early medieval Europe, most protein came from pork, because what they would do in the early Middle Ages is they would just let the pigs go out into the forest, and most of Europe was forested in this era, and they would just kill off the pigs. And so that was a big issue because of Islam's prohibition on pork. And at the same time, a lot of the calories and a lot of their way of storing grain in this era was based off alcohol, especially in Russia for the long Russian winters. And Islam's prohibition on alcohol also creates an issue with forest climates. And Islam did very well with steppe-based peoples, because Islam was originally founded by the Arabs, who were nomadic camel people, if we're being specific. And Islam was also able to combine a lot of the ancestor worship. I'm not an Islamic theologian by any means, but it was able to combine with a lot of the traditional belief structures of the steppe. Do you think some African countries like Nigeria, DR Congo, and Ethiopia can become new Chinas? I talk about this in every single video I have done. However, I would say I think Ethiopia has great potential, and the Congo has geographically a strong basis. Some of you have recommended I make a video, what if the Congo is a superpower? I'm probably going to do that once I read John Gunter's Africa and whatever the history of the Congo is called, so that I can make that scenario. And just for amusement, because it's kind of it's a Congo wank. How long will this stream last? Another 15 minutes. Say hypothetical middle-income country gets access to large oil reserves. What should their actions be to ensure that we utilize the wealth best? So the issue oil has is Dutch disease. I don't know if you've heard of this. It's that oil makes the currency more expensive, so that actual manufacturers that support jobs get hurt. And so Norway did this brilliantly, where Norway saved most of the money from their oil reserves to invest it later, when a lot of countries, Scotland included, was they just splurged the money on various things. And I think you need the financial discipline of saving that money for the future rather than spending it now. But I know that if the US government got a lot of oil now, we would just splurge it. So how important was the Sykes-Picot Treaty? So the Sykes-Picot Treaty gets a huge amount of flack for being the thing that destroyed the Middle East. I don't think that's fully accurate because the Middle East history from Babylon and Assyria has been big empires that didn't pay a lot of attention to ethnic boundaries. But so I would say the Sykes-Picot Treaty, it made artificial boundaries, but it would be very hard to draw boundaries that would make sense given the internal divisions. I have ethnic maps. So if you want to look at the Middle East ethnic maps, the borders would be very difficult to do it right. And in Europe, there have been hundreds or thousands of years of getting the border, of changing ethnic groups to fit the national boundaries. And I don't know how you would draw a border of the Middle East correctly. And I feel like even if you did, then there would be internal divisions that would just appear. Like Egypt. Egypt is mostly ethnically homogenous, and Egypt's been a country for thousands of years, but that doesn't prevent them from having internal strife. If you could fix one international boundary, what would it be? That's so hard. There are so many. God. Let me get back to you. Thoughts on universal basic income. I like welfare in general. You shouldn't let people starve in the street. But at the same time, I don't see why universal income would work better than just a normal welfare system where you don't give money to the rich, you give more money to the poor. And I don't think we should develop a society where so what universal basic income is doing is it's preparing us for a mechanized society in which human beings don't work, and the results of machines are spread among the human population. And I don't think that's a good idea, because I think that if the elites have the power to not give stuff to the population, they will. And so I think that mechanization will result in greater inequality, greater political oppression, all that stuff. And Yuval Noah Harari's he spells this out in Homo Deus. And I think that if you have a society where just it's entirely welfare, people are going to lose purpose in their lives, because we all need to work, we all need to strive, we all need meaning in our lives. But if that doesn't exist, we're just going to turn in ourselves. We're going to have so much drama. We're going to wage war for the fun of it, where people are going to turn on each other, and it would be, I don't think it would be good. Is Britain doomed to become a secondary power? It already is. Maybe even a tertiary one. What if Gustavus Adolphus was not killed at Lutzen? I apologize, but Gustavus Adolphus libera et impera. Sorry. So I could see the Swedes marching on Vienna and driving the Habsburgs out of Central Europe and becoming the great Central European power. There weren't enough Swedes to run it like an empire, but they would probably build a loose union of the German states based out of Dresden and be able to form a coalition of the German states and drive Catholicism out of Central Europe, which wouldn't be hard because Austria and Bohemia were both majority Protestant at this time. And it was only through centuries of Habsburg rule that Catholics took over in that area. What do you think of the idea that COVID-19 was sent by the Chinese to crash our markets and then buy up our assets? That's bullshit. The Chinese are hurting just as badly as we are. That's just dumb. I mean, it's like, no one would want this to happen. Cooperation is in general better. No one wants a world-spanning economic system that would no one wants a plague that will destroy the world system and kill hundreds of thousands of people. Was the Industrial Revolution a mistake? No. I hiked the Appalachian Trail, and once you have done things without industrial technology, you understand how amazing it is. Like, there are people who are like, I just wish I could work in the field all day and be in touch with nature. And I'm like, no, you don't. You live in a city. You've never had to struggle with nature. You've never had to struggle with doing like cleaning your clothes. Cleaning. I had to do this in the Appalachian Trail when I couldn't get a laundromat. You have to scrub your clothes. You have to put it in the creek. It smells like shit. And I mean, it's like hours of work. Or like carrying buckets up from a stream to your house for water. Running water is legitimately the best thing we've invented. Sanitation. Okay, 10 minutes left, guys. Thoughts on scientific denialism in the US? I think it's I don't like scientific denialism, but at the same time, because people should remain rational, people should be able to deal with the world for what it is and understand the truth. But at the same time, the way science is structured today, it's structured for scientific denialism. So it's very hard to learn science unless you are in the sciences. Like, I wish that I could know more about science. And when I was younger, I really wanted to read science books and study, but not much is written about science. And that was really crushing for me. I'd go through bookstores looking for good generic science books. But that's part of the reason I went into history, was I don't like classes. I don't like school. I like reading by myself and studying. And so the sciences are designed so it's difficult to apprehend unless you're in part of the scientific culture. And that leads to irrationality, and that leads to the general population having no understanding of science. And that's why we're so badly dealing with all our scientific revolutions. That's why no one talks about automation, why no one talks about genetic engineering, even though there's those pressing issues of our time, and why they're not even talked about in 2020 or 2016 election. Favorite pretzel type? I like the local Pennsylvania pretzels. They're German, they're soft, they're 60 cents. Oh, yeah, I love German. I'm not a pretzel snob, I have to say. But I mean, any high quality, I want to say any high quality pretzel, but that goes without saying. What if all of South America was the Amazon rainforest? We'd have a lot more oxygen, and our climate would be messed up if we had rainforests in Patagonia. So it would be like the Eocene when there were jungles in Greenland. Do you hate Muslims? I just said that I would have been an ardent supporter of early Islam. Does that mean anything? Huh. Was the atomic bomb a mistake? So, two opinions on this. The first is that I'm not entirely sure how much the Ottoman bomb was important for maintaining peace after the Second World War, because you could either blame the atomic bomb for the long peace that we've had, or you could blame the disproportional power between Russia and America, and that it wasn't in Russia and America's self-interest to wage war with each other, and they were able to destroy any upstarts in the global system. And so I don't know if we had a more fluid power system if we would wage war. But the atomic bomb, it seems to have done a great job of maintaining peace. But it's the sword of Damocles, as Dan Carlin says, and that it gives us enormous potential. I think nuclear energy, if we can fix it, is the future. And but at the same time, it allows us to wipe ourselves off the map. And so I don't think the atomic bomb was a mistake. And I mean, just right after it was invented, the invasion of Japan would have killed millions of people. And so the atomic bomb was a lifesaver. Were these Central Powers the good guys? I mean, World War I had no good guys. I mean, everyone was the good guys by World War II standards. That's what I say. In World War I, everyone's a good guy. World War II, everyone's a bad guy. I mean, America was probably the best power in World War II, and they dropped nuclear bombs on people and firebombed. But in World War I, I mean, most of the countries involved were democracies. I mean, Germany had full suffrage. Everyone maintained at least some respect for human dignity and human life. And so, I mean, I like all of the countries in World War I, with the exception of maybe Russia. Although, actually, I like World War I Russia too. I mean, watch my video on what if communism never took over Russia. It's a czarist wank. Oh yeah, the Ottoman Empire. They did a lot of really nasty things to the Armenians and the Greeks and their various ethnic minorities. If you were forced to choose any extremist system, what would it be? And we all know or I've said many times I'm a centrist. I mean, I would go with extreme libertarianism. No, I don't even know that. God, all extremes are so terrible. Um, might I might go with extremist militarism. Yeah, I think I'd go with extremist militarism because any extreme libertarian anarchist system would result in mass death and chaos. And in general, a militarist system would be able to protect its citizens and would be able to protect the nation. So I'd go with that. Extreme stoicism. Yeah, we all know I'm not, or we don't all know. I shouldn't make pretensions, but I mean, I only went 500 miles in the Appalachian Trail. My stoic spirit is not strong enough yet. I have not hardened my soul enough to live with Giardia. Um, Please explain your theory of future religions. Not in the 5 minutes we have here. Next live stream. Are you playing alternate history in Poland/Lithuania? Poland-Lithuania class their Commonwealth. I'm going to read Adam Zamoyski's History of Poland first, so I can get a stronger grip on Polish history. Who's better, republic or democracy? Democracies can exist on a large scale because the general population in countries of millions of people they just can't manage. Local people cannot get involved in a higher level, and the countries that have tried that, they've become tyrannies, like Russia and Athens, because they tried to maintain their democracies on the local level, but at the same time, they couldn't do that on a bigger level. So the city-states of Rome and Athens started oppressing their empires, and so I think republics that are able to integrate their whole domains are much better than local democracies. Could a world-spanning civilization exist in the Middle Ages? A world-spanning civilization can't exist now, and we have boats and airplanes, and we have steam diesel boats and airplanes. Oh yeah, people are pointing out all the atrocities that the pre-World War I powers did. That's entirely fair, but they're better than what happened afterwards and before, so still like those guys. Do you believe in aliens? I mean, statistically, what are the chances are that there aren't aliens? I mean, the universe out there, it's just endless. I mean, it's not technically endless, but it's so huge that to our puny brains it is. And so the chances there aren't aliens are tiny. There must be something similar to us out there. When was one country most powerful in comparison to other nations of the world? It would be the U.S. in the 1990s. It was the one time in history in which one country was the preeminent military power. And throughout the rest of history, people were in their own local domains. So China was Jupiter of its area. Persia might be powerful in the Middle East. France might be powerful in Europe. But the U.S. was the only power that was preeminent everywhere. When was the last time you went outside? I go hiking and biking every day. I live in the country, so I don't have to deal with people, so I don't have to worry. Thoughts on the multiverse? People far smarter than me, who spent much more time thinking about this, did exist, so I'm in no position to criticize them. Okay, 2 more minutes, guys. Great questions. Best map? Oh yeah, I promised my best fantasy map ever. I really like the Game of Thrones maps. The maps that the fans and nerds of that show make are really, really good. I really like Tolkien's. I like Tolkien's maps a lot. I like the maps on DeviantArt are very good. Like if you go on DeviantArt, their maps are gorgeous. A lot of alternate history maps. My favorite map in the whole world is, I think, Roger of Sicily in the 12th century commissioned a map to be made, and it has shockingly modern accuracy for a map made in the 12th century. And the favorite map I've made is my ethnic map of the world in 1914. And I've also made a handmade map of the world in the year 1644, and a map I made in the year of and a map I made for my sister of the year 1914. Okay, one last question. Okay, I guess we're gonna end on how will space warfare affect geopolitics? Um, so I was reading the Mario said, I can sense your disappointment while reading our questions. Okay, two more questions. What if the Russians had taken Constantinople? So that was, I mean, it's hard to think of it. They would have to have done really well in the Crimean War, which they lost in our world, and because of their logistical inferiority, the British and the French. And so, if they had done that, they could have put fleets in the Mediterranean, and then they could have. I don't even know. I feel like after a certain point, Russia would have overextended itself, and I can't see them. I can't see them conquering Anatolia because that's and because Anatolia is mountainous and the Turks are great fighters. And at the same time, I mean, they could hold on to the Balkans, but what would that get them? And I mean, the Balkans, they'd have to fight they'd have to fight lots of insurrections, and they'd have to just deal with Germany in the West. So I'll end on the future of Christianity. So Christianity is either going to slowly die out or it's going to reform in a spectacular fashion. And I think Christianity is probably going to reform, especially in America. America has been very good. They call it like fast food Christianity, and then America has got like 40 different sects of Protestantism, and they just keep on making new ones. So Christianity has been able to consistently adapt in America. And I'm guessing Africa and all the different new cultural areas that Christianity is moving into, they'll adapt to the cultures and develop new forms of Christianity. And I think a lot of the future of Christianity is digital. Like one of my friends who's a minister, he's developing the first digital mainline church in America, and so I think that's really awesome. And so I think that a lot of the future of Christianity could be online. And if Christianity develops new philosophic bases, if someone is able to develop a new philosophy that could bring the Christian message new meaning, then I think that it could reform. I mean, my biggest guess is I think Christianity is going to go through another reformation that able to bring it into the digital age, like kind of like how like the traditional Chinese belief structures to survive to the present because they've had Confucianism and Taoism and all that stuff to revitalize them and keep them alive. Okay, so this is it. I'm going to do this again in 2 weeks. Thank you very much. I love doing these and I love hearing all your questions. So take care and have an excellent time. Goodbye.